Hi there, class. It is June 16th, and we are here to talk about Othello a little bit more. First of all, keep sending me those essay questions. I've communicated with many of you by now, but if you have not sent an essay question in, you should do so, right? And hopefully you can do so soon. So far, I would say a lot of the questions have focused on the racial questions, right? Which is a good thing. But perhaps by the end of the day, or the end of this video, right, those of you who are interested in writing about gender issues will have a little bit to talk about as well, right? Because in Act 3, Scene 3, right, we had Emilia, the handkerchief thief, take Desdemona's handkerchief over to Iago. She does not know what he will do with it when he takes it, right? But, well, there's a lot to say about Emilia. She is one of the sort of controversial characters here in the play. You could look at her as being a sort of hero, or you could look at her as a villain. So let's start with the scene that goes. This is Act 3, Scene 4, right? Desdemona is looking for that handkerchief, right? And she says, to Emilia straight up, "Where should I lose that handkerchief, Emilia?" And Emilia answers, "I know not, madam." Right? That's on page 121. Right? So Emilia is lying there, right? She is lying to her friend Desdemona. Now, let me again emphasize that Emilia's role in the world is to be an obedient wife, right? As a wife in Shakespeare's time, your expectation is that you're going to be obedient to your husband, right? So, Emilia, by lying there, is being obedient to Iago, because Iago does not want her to tell anyone that she stole the handkerchief, right? So she is doing her duty as a wife by doing that. That being said, let's see what happens. Othello comes in, and he is angry, right? He is asking for the handkerchief, right? And trying to get Desdemona to give it to him. So before I focus in on what Othello is saying here, and there is a lot to say, let me just emphasize, during this whole argument here, where Othello is saying, "Ha, wherefore?" Right? Is it lost? Is it gone? Speak. Is it out of the way? Right? So Othello is sort of going crazy in this scene, right? Thinking that she's lost the handkerchief and that she, has, given it to Cassio, all that stuff. Emilia is there in the scene. She is watching, right? And she has the ability at any time to end the fight, right? Because she, even if she doesn't know, because of dramatic irony, what Iago is doing with the handkerchief, she can clearly see that there is, a problem here that she has caused by stealing it, right? So, uh, for Desdemona, or for Emilia, right? You know, she doesn't know what is going on when she gives it to him, but you can definitely see this person is at the very least complicit in what's going on with Desdemona, right? Because she could just say, "Hey, Othello, I stole that for him," right? And then the play is over, right? But she does not do that. Now, uh, Desdemona and Othello. Let's. Oh wait, let me one more thing about. Well, actually, no. I'll come back to Emilia after. Let me just focus here. Okay, so Othello, in this scene, does confront Desdemona about this handkerchief. Right? He still isn't saying why he's so worried about it, but there's a speech here that sort of is important for understanding where Othello is at. Right? This is on page 123 and also on the top of page 125, Act 3, Scene 4, line 54. So he says, "That is a fault. That handkerchief did an Egyptian to my mother give. She was a charmer, and could almost read the thoughts of people. She told her, while she kept it, 'twould make her amiable, and subdue my father entirely to her love. But if she lost it, or made gift of it, my father's eye should hold her loathed, and his spirit should hunt after new fancies. She, dying, gave it me, and bid me what my fate would have me wive to give it her. I did so, and take heed on it, make it a darling like your precious eye. To lose it or give it way were such perdition as nothing else could match. So, Othello here is talking about how there is magic in the handkerchief, right? That this handkerchief is got some sort of magic spell cast inside of it in order to uh, not make Desdemona fall in love with him, but in order to keep him from falling in love with someone else, right? So that's this magic of the handkerchief. Now, remember there was a big fuss about magic at the beginning of the play, right? You know, about how, Othello used this handkerchief, or Othello used some sort of magic to get Desdemona to love him or anything like this, right? And Othello said, no, I didn't use magic. But now here he is talking about magic. So what's with this magic? So, we should understand the motivation here, right? It's not that Othello all of a sudden believes in magic, right? That's not the idea at all. He just wants to freak Desdemona out and get her to confess to cheating on him with Cassio, right? At this point, he is pretty much sure that Desdemona is cheating on him, and he just is looking for proof, right? So when he's saying these things to her, saying, "Oh, if you give it away or if you lose it, it's gonna wreck the marriage, and I'm not gonna love you anymore," right? That is him trying to freak Desdemona out and get her to confess and say, "Oh, I gave it to Cassio," right? It's important to note at this point, Desdemona or Othello is completely convinced that Desdemona is cheating on him, right? He's just looking for proof, right? So he is freaking out, right? He is sort of interrogating her and, yelling at her, saying, "Is it lost? Is it gone? Speak. Is it out of the way?" And Desdemona says, "Heaven bless us. Say you, it is lost, Luce, but what and if it were? How? I say it is not lost. Fetch it, let me see it," right? So he is furious, right? And again, he's sort of freaking out there, which is why, Desdemona is sort of getting a little defensive. But Desdemona here doesn't know what's going on, but Othello is sort of convinced of it, right? And it's important to recognize again the dramatic irony, because at the bottom of page 125, right, line 86, Act 3, Scene 4, Desdemona says, "Why so I can, sir, but I will not now. This is a trick to put me from my suit. Pray you, let Cassio be received again." Right? So Desdemona has no idea of what Iago has been telling Othello, right? And so she is still in the mode where she's trying to help her friend get his job back, right? So she mentions Cassio at the absolute worst time, right? And says, "Oh, you'll never meet a more sufficient man," right? But again, that's the worst possible time for her to do that. So the important thing here is that Desdemona still has no idea what's going on. From her perspective, Othello is just being weird. He's sort of going crazy here for no reason, right? Because she has no idea what Iago is doing, right? So she's still loyal to this guy and does whatever he says. And again, that's sort of an ideal wife for the time. Now, let's contrast that with Emilia here, right? So Othello storms off. He says, "Away," right? And Desdemona says, "I never saw this before. Sure, there's some wonder in this handkerchief. I am most unhappy in the loss of it," right? And then Emilia, who will remember stole the handkerchief in the first place, turns to her, and this is on page 127, Act 3, Scene 4, line 103. Right? She says, "'Tis not a year or two shows us a man. They are all but stomachs, and we all but food. They eat us hungrily, and when they are full, they belch us. So, Emilia, first of all, let's point to the sort of hypocrisy of that statement, right? She's saying, oh, yeah, men are bad, all of that. But at the same time, she's caused the problem in the first place, right? She knows where that handkerchief is right now. It's with Iago, but she's not telling her because she's loyal to Iago. So let's recognize that. But at the same time, this shows that Emilia is quite different from Desdemona, right? While Desdemona is loyal to Othello even when he's angry at her, even when he's doing bad stuff to her, she is 100% loyal. Emilia, on the other hand, has some critical things to say about men, right? She is not like Desdemona. She is not loyal to the death, right? The way Desdemona is, right? She is someone who understands that, men, they eat us hungrily, as in they enjoy us while they can, and then they belch us, as in they just dump us, right? So she is a lot more critical of men than Desdemona ever is. So that brings us to Act 4, right, where Iago now is going to produce the proof that he's been talking about, right? So, what you see in Act 4 really does need to be seen. This is probably the most visual part of the story, right? But the plan that Iago has is, well, first let me just actually, before I talk about his plan, so Iago is saying that Cassio has been bragging, right? So this is Act 4, Scene 1, right? So we're almost finished the play, by the way. So he says that he has used her. Where is that? Protectress of their honor. Okay, hold on, let me find out. Here it is. Act 3, Scene, or Act 4, Scene 1, line 30, right? Iago says, he hath, my lord, but you will be assured, nor more that he'll unswear. What hath he said? Faith, that he did. I know not what he did. What? Lie with her, on her, what we will, right? So by saying lie with her or on her, right, he's saying that Cassio and Desdemona have had sex, right? So Othello at this point is totally freaking out, right? And there's this speech here on line 35, right? Where Othello says, lie with her, lie on her. We say lie on her when they belie her. Lie with her, that's wholesome. Handkerchief, confessions, handkerchief, to confess and be hanged for his labor. First to be hanged and then to confess. I tremble at it. Nature would not invest herself in such shadowing passion without some instruction. It is not words that shake me thus. Pish, noses, ears, and lips. Is it possible? Confess. Handkerchief, oh devil. And then he falls into a trance. So, what this is they call it an epilepsy in the story, but this is what we in the modern world would call a panic attack, right? Othello is freaking out here. He's not really making any sense, right? He's sort of shaking and everything like that. That's what they mean when they say falls into a trance, right? So here he's totally freaking out, right? He's breathing and he's, you know, essentially starting to babble because he is so worked up and freaked out about the idea of his wife cheating on him. And Iago, what he says after this, right? Because Othello has fallen into a trance, right? So what that means is that this over here is a soliloquy, right? Meaning that it's Iago talking to the audience about his thoughts, right? He says immediately after, "Work on, my medicine work. Thus credulous fools are caught, and many worthy and chaste dames, even thus, all guiltless, meet reproach." And then he goes back to Othello and says, "What ho, my lord, I say, Othello." So Iago has got Othello in the palm of his hands at this point. He completely buys it, right? So Othello is sort of under Iago's thrall here. But the whole thing that Othello wants is proof, right? He needs to have some sort of evidence before he can move, right? And he's relying on Iago for that proof. And that gives us one of the more unique scenes here in the play, where is it? Othello is going to be on stage, but he's going to stand aside, right? In Shakespeare's time, you would almost have him sit near or even with the audience, right? So that he is essentially watching what happens, right? So let's see, Act 4, Scene 1, line 92. So Cassio is there, right? And Iago is talking to Cassio, and the plan is very simple. Where is it? Othello is here. He says, "Dost thou hear, Iago? I will be found most cunning in my patience, but dost thou hear most bloody? That's not amiss, but yet keep in time and all will you withdraw." So Othello, right, and this is why it's important to see the play, right, sort of stands to the side, right? He sort of, just do I have a cat that will demonstrate? He'll like stand off screen like this cat over there, right? He'll stand over there and listen to Iago and Cassio talk, right? And this scene, you really do have to remember that, right? So what he says here explains it, right? Now will I question Cassio of Bianca, a housewife that by selling her desires buys herself bread and clothes. It is a creature that doubts on Cassio, as 'tis the strumpet's plague to beguile many and be beguiled by one. He, when he hears of her, cannot refrain from the excess of laughter. Here he comes. As he shall smile, Othello shall go mad, and his unbookish jealousy must construe poor Cassio's smiles, gestures, and light behavior quite in the wrong. So, the idea here is fairly straightforward. He will ask Cassio about a woman named Bianca, who we'll talk about in a moment, and Cassio will answer based on that, while Othello thinks that Cassio is talking about Desdemona, right? That's the plan here by Iago, right? And what this part says, right, on line 106, right, on page 141, where Iago says, "Ply Desdemona well, and you are sure on it." Othello hears that, and then you see it says, "Speaking lower. Now, if the suit lay in Bianca's power, how quickly should you speed?" Right? And then you'll see Cassio says a bunch of things about Bianca that are not very nice, right? Saying, "Alas, poor rogue, I think in faith she loves me." Othello thinks that that is talking about Cassio. That is Cassio talking about Desdemona, right? So that's the plan here, right? That essentially Iago will make him talk about Bianca and make Othello think he's talking about Desdemona, right? And so, from Othello's perspective, right, this is Cassio talking about his wife as if she's just a prostitute that he is messing with, and Desdemona is just one of the women that Cassio is messing around with, and now he's 100% convinced that Desdemona is cheating. Now, let me spare a word for Bianca here. Iago describes her as a housewife, right? You'll see a housewife that by selling her desires buys herself bread and clothes, right? And you'll see in the footnote number 30, right? Housewife here means hussy. Okay, well, hussy means prostitute, right? So Iago is describing her as a prostitute. That being said, it might strike you that if it were a prostitute, as in someone who is literally taking money for um sex, right? You would be surprised that when she comes in, this is line 148, Bianca comes in. Let the devil and his dam haunt you. What do you mean by that same handkerchief you gave me now? Even now, I was a fine fool to take it. I must take out the work, a likely piece of work, that you should find it in your chamber and not know who left it there. This is some minx's token, and I must take out the work. There, give it to your hobby horse, wheresoever you had it. I'll take out no work on it. So, she's mad that she's found this handkerchief, Desdemona's handkerchief, by the way, from Cassio, right? She's angry about that. So, it's sort of a question. If she's a prostitute, why is she getting jealous, right? Prostitution is ultimately a business transaction, right? If Cassio were paying her for sex, that, there's no illusion about that, right? So when Iago describes her as a prostitute, right, it is perhaps uh him just slandering her, right? Because, if you look at the way she acts, right, if she's not a prostitute, then she's just Cassio's girlfriend, and Cassio is clearly just messing around with him, right? Again, um, what he says, uh, Iago says on line 115, she gives it out that you shall marry her. Do you intend it? And Cassio's just like, ha 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 ha. I marry her? What? A customer? Prithee, bear some charity on my wit. Do not think it so unwholesome. Ha 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 ha. Right? So they're just sort of laughing at her, right, and treating her like a prostitute when she might not actually be a prostitute. So the reason I bring this up is if you are interested in writing about some of the gender issues here in this play, right? Some of the sexism issues, right? This would definitely be one example, right? Because this lady Bianca, right? It doesn't seem like she is a prostitute, right? It's if she were a prostitute, why is she jealous, right? So that is one thing to consider as you think of your essay topics if you haven't already. Now, that being said, she does have that handkerchief. Othello sees her with that handkerchief and assumes Cassio is sleeping with Desdemona, and he's also sleeping with this lady who's a hooker, and she, therefore, has given the handkerchief to her, right? So Othello looks at this and he says, where is that line? Where he says, okay, let me find it, hold on. He says on line 141, oh, I see that nose of yours, but not that dog, I shall throw it too, right? So he is ready to kill here, right? Othello, again, is 100% convinced, and he's ready to start taking steps here. Now, before we wrap up here, right? Again, we don't have questions for you to do because I want you guys to focus on your essay. But one thing to consider, especially for those of you interested in writing about sexism and gender, is let's imagine something, right? And we'll talk about this, by the way, on Friday when we have our weekly meeting, right? We're going to talk about this issue, right? So imagine that we had a play where Desdemona is doing everything that Iago accuses her of doing, right? Imagine she's just married Othello, and here she is having an affair with Cassio right away, right? That's not a very good thing to do, right? It's barely even after their honeymoon, and now here they are, doing that, right? So that's a problem, right? What would the appropriate punishment be, right? So in our modern society, you might think, well, probably divorce, right? Or something else, right? Uh, because Othello's answer to that question is murder, right? He's going to kill his wife for that, right? And that is an extreme reaction to being cheated on, to say the least, right? That, his wife's cheated on him, so he's going to kill her, right? He's going to choke her to death in her bed, right? So that is how Othello will react to that. And we're going to discuss this a little bit more on Friday when we have our meeting, right? That's going to be one of our topics, right? But essentially, this is a very extreme thing, right? And it has a lot to do with the fact that, he looks at Desdemona as his property, right? Not so much as a human being, right? If you think about it, the idea of responding to adultery with murder, right? Even if you look at it from a religious perspective, right? If you kill someone for adultery, right? You're responding with one sin with another, right? So that is something to consider, right, as we go into the last acts of the play. But for now, I think we're almost at half an hour here, so I'm going to say for tomorrow, please get to the end of Act 4. We're going to have a lot to talk about in terms of gender for that, and by Wednesday, we will be finished this play. So, if you haven't already, send me your essay questions. I'm glad that a lot of you have done so already. But yeah, for tomorrow, let me give you the exact page. Read up to page 175, and I'll say again, if you can watch the play, please watch the play. Alright, guys, I will see you guys then, and I hope you're all doing well.